Welcome back, AP. That's right. We're going down into that bottom corner real quick. We're jumping down here, and I just want to go ahead and throw this out there. Fantastic job today in class. The quizzes are looking really, really top-notch. You guys paid attention during the Sepoy Mutiny story and the Boxer Rebellion, and I really appreciate y'all kind of coming along with me on this understanding that it is important for you to know about the atrocities of imperialism and the effects of Europeans on the rest of the world, right? So we talked about the Sepoy Mutiny, the Boxer Rebellion, which are going to result in 906,000 casualties total. And it's important to know that because this is happening in the background as we're leading up to what? That's right, a crazy, intense war. So jot this down really quick. World War I, right? We are now getting into the ridiculousness that is World War I, okay? World War I, the thing that I don't feel enough of y'all know enough about or enough Americans know enough about. And I think a lot of that is just because of American centrism and the idea that, like, we think that the only wars that are important are the ones that we were hyper involved in, right? So whereas in World War I, we were actually only in it for 1 year, right? So go ahead and jot the years of World War I down, right? So it's going to happen from 1914 to 1918. It is going to encompass the entire continent and lead to a massive war that will claim the lives of 10 million people throughout Europe. I think that's including civilians as well. But it's important for you to know all of these things before we begin the massive lead up to World War I, right? And have we been talking about the lead up to World War I this entire time? Of course we have. Mary Salvaggi, I know you were like, I thought that's what we were talking about this whole time. We were talking about that this whole time, right? But now we're getting into the direct political action that led to the beginning of World War I, right? And a quick note, just to kind of keep this in the back of your mind, you can jot this down in your notes, it's really, really up to you. There has been a lot going on with art and science during the late 1800s, early 1900s. Coming off the heels of Freud, getting into guys like Albert Einstein, who was actually going to become majorly active in the early 1900s. Couple that with Vincent van Gogh, who's going to create post-impressionistic art and then impressionism under Monet and da-da-da-da-da. But I am not going to talk about science and art when I have to talk about war, okay? We will talk about science and art, and it led to the craziness that was World War I and the big changes in science and art going past World War I and then into World War II in the next unit, right? So now the big thing, though, that you need to understand is that there's been a lot of going on with that, but we're just going to talk about the war for now, and then we're going to get into that later. So let's go ahead and lay this out, kind of like chapters in a book, like a table of contents. What are our overall causes of World War I? Well, everyone else in a high school class learns it like this, that there are the four main causes of World War I, right? And the four main causes of World War I are militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. Now, I don't teach it that way to AP European students. Not that it's not correct, because it is, all right? So, like, is that necessarily wrong? No. Did militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism lead directly to World War I? Of course it did, right? So, ask any historian that. They'll be like, yes, that is true, amongst a lot of other causes. To try and lump a war that lasted that long into four causes alone, it's a little ridiculous. And also, something that we're ignoring is that these are the four main causes for the governments of the countries and the rulers themselves, right? These are the four main causes that the aristocracy and the conservatives of the European era agreed to go to war in 1914, right? That's the militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism. But what we're ignoring in this sense is what's pushing these guys to war. Why did people enlist in mass to go to this war, fight for their countries, and die? Why is this guy in the trench while those other people like Kaiser Wilhelm II didn't fire a shot in this entire thing, right? I think it's important to know that. I think it's important to understand that, yes, the main causes are why the governments of Europe are going to go to war. But, like, if you really look at it, and I'm stealing this from John Green, because I have looked this up, and he actually is 100% accurate. Historians are beginning to look at World War I as this thing that's like a road to war, right? That there was a road we took to war, and a road that would eventually lead to war. However, much like any roadway, there were exits. There were places we could have pulled over. There were places we could have stopped. There were places we could have turned around, but we chose not to, right? And the big thing you need to understand going into it is that the common man, the guys in this trench, are just passengers on this road to war because their lives have dramatically changed. The era that they were born in is dramatically different from the era that they're fighting in, right? How life has changed? Well, just for a few, right? Their family structures have changed. Maybe early on, their mothers were told they're not supposed to go out and work, but then later on in life, they have to, right? So the Pandora's box in science has been forever changed because you got Freud analyzing these new family structures of the middle class and the fact that, like, you're having only a few siblings and your parents love you now and that could damage you and you could repress blah, 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 blah. And that, like, electricity is being generated now and telegraph lines are being laid, steam engine and steam-powered transportation and quinine medicine and all this other crazy stuff has just emerged out of this box and we can't put it back, right? Gender roles have changed. Suffrage has been expanded to more people, and in some countries universally, right? For example, Germany, to anybody over the age of 25. However, women are beginning to fight for their suffrage roles as well. And also, economics have grown tremendously, right? So these men were affected by these changes, but these reasons are why governments agreed to go to war, right? And I do believe that John Green is right, and the other historians he's referencing, is that this was a road to war. And this road to war is paved with distrust, right? It's paved with nerves. It's paved with aggression and nationalistic tension, right? So the big thing you have to understand is that this distrust could earliest on be seen by the competition between nation states. Like, the nations are beginning to compete. You see, this is why I think MAIN is a little bit too conservative and small of a list, because the competition between the states is leading to the M, the A, the I, and the N, right? The idea that, like, the main competition or the competition led to the main result or the main causes is because these countries are like Germany is brand baby new. They're brand new. And they have created their empire at the infraction and at the humiliation of who? Of France, right? So when you really look at the core of this distrust, a lot of it comes down to those two, France and Germany, right? A lot of this really cooks down to the idea that the competitions between Germany and France and other powers as well, including Russia and the Ottomans and other areas as well, the Austrians and the Russians and the Russians and the Japanese and the Russians and the Russians, right? You have to understand that, like, what the competition, though, is really going to kind of the fires of that competition and that distrust, its nexus, its focal point, its hottest area was between France and Germany. Now, ironically enough, who's this guy? It's OVB. It's Otto von Bismarck. Some of you are like, I thought he got fired. We're jumping back into when he was still in power. And you have to understand that, like, Otto von Bismarck actually tried to keep that fire controlled, right? He was fully aware that France hated Germany's guts. He was aware of it. He knew it. He was going into this whole thing being like, okay, they really, really do not like us, right? And do they have a reason to not like you, Otto von Bismarck? He's like, yeah, probably, right? Because of the Ems telegram, the Franco-Prussian War, Alsace-Lorraine now belongs to the Germans, imperial growth, and the fact that Germany was trying to scoop up territories in France, or territories in Africa that France wanted, and the rise of Germany as a superpower. You have to understand, and this is what we referenced on the test, that Germany's industrial growth began to exceed that of Great Britain, that of France, even that of Russia, because of their creation of the Bessemer process of the production of steel, chemical engineering at companies like Bayer, creating the first aspirin pills, and Germany is becoming a superpower on this new stage. And they want to be included, right? They are tired of the stage being crowded by Britain, France, Russia, and they want to be included. And the way that Otto von Bismarck summed this up was he said, Germany is a satisfied power, right? So he actually said that, like, we as Germans are satisfied at our place now on this stage. And we do not want to have a large-scale war affect our economy and affect us in a negative way. So ironically enough, Otto von Bismarck early on, this is one of the good things he did. Aha, we talked about that in class today, right? Otto von Bismarck does a good thing, does a bad thing. This is a good thing, right? He believed to prevent war, he would create a large-scale alliance. And is this a genius idea? Yes, it is, right? His first alliance is called the Alliance of the Three Emperors, right? And that lasts from 1873 to 1891. And in the Alliance of the Three Emperors are the following groups. Jot these down, right? You got Russia, Austria, and Germany, right? Because each of them is ruled over by an emperor, right? So the League of the Three Emperors. Austria has the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Austro-Hungarian emperor named Franz Joseph, right? Otto von Bismarck is being led by the German Empire, the German king, Kaiser Wilhelm I. And Russia is being ruled over at this point in time by Alexander III, the Emperor of Russia, right? Because Nicholas II doesn't take over until 1896, all right? So now, how does that isolate France? Why does that prevent France from getting all sassy and trying to start a war? Well, it's important to note that there are some bumps in the road, that this was not going to be a perfect alliance, right? But it isolates France because it creates a system where the only people that France can turn to is the British, who have historically not wanted to be involved in continental affairs, the Spanish, who haven't been super powerful since like the 1600s, the Italians, who are in a fledgling state and just became a country in 1861 and did not have the industrial growth that actually mirrored the Germans, and that's all. Who are they going to ally with? The Ottomans? The Ottomans are dying, right? So, they're not going anywhere. So Otto von Bismarck took away any large power that France could ally with easily that they might try to go to war with Germany with. This is a genius idea by Bismarck. Now, the hard part, though, is Bismarck has to keep this whole thing together, right? So I don't know if any of y'all have ever taken or made, there was these little things you could get out of a vending machine when I was a kid, right? There were these little balls that you constructed out of 8 different pieces, right? And whenever you were constructing them, you had to put them all together, and you had to slide the top one on, and it was a very delicate thing. That was the League of Three Emperors, right? Otto von Bismarck had to gently, like egg toss, like for challenge, right? You had to be so gentle with it because any minute it could break, right? Mainly due to the fact that the Russians are not fans of the Austrians right now, right? So the bumps in the road mainly come from two things: the Russo-Turkish War and Pan-Slavism, right? So you have to understand that the Russians were coming to the aid of the Slavic countries in the Balkans, right? So the Balkans, including countries like Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, Albania, Bosnia, those people are Slavic, right? They speak Slavic languages. Some of them use Cyrillic alphabet-based languages. Who is the other big Slavic country who has always believed their culture to be completely different from that of the rest of Europe? Russia, right? So Russia was supporting any Slavic people that they believed needed their help. That's why in this political cartoon, you can see the Ottomans right here, who controlled those Balkan territories for a time, are about to be crushed by the Slavic Avenger right here, the Kingdom of Russia coming down to destroy them, while the other powers of Europe look on, right? Russia on the way to save the Bulgarians, particularly. And the Russo-Turkish War broke out because the Ottomans were committing atrocities against Slavic Christians in Bulgaria, right? And in Bulgaria, they were killing families, taking over areas, and mainly due to the fact that the Ottoman power was dying and their reform was failing, right? And what ended up occurring, they lost places like Greece, they lost Serbia, they lost Bulgaria, they lost Romania, and they were having to keep pulling their borders in further and further and further because of all this crazy stuff that was going on. So the Russo-Turkish War led to more Balkan people being free. And Russia left the alliance for a pretty brief amount of time because they felt cheated in the Treaty of Berlin. Because during the Treaty of Berlin, the big thing that happens is Austria begins to distrust the Russians and say that they should not be involved in the creation and setting up of governments inside of the Balkans, right? So the Serbians create a brand new country called Serbia, or Greater Serbia. Bulgaria creates a country, right? And the Russians feel cheated because they were not getting the territorial gains that they were promised, and because they believed that it was a matter of time until the Austrians went in there and scooped up some of the Slavic cousins of theirs, right? Serbs, Bulgarians, and all these other people, okay? So the big thing, though, also, is Russia left for a short amount of time. And it was a weird temporary breakup, but as Russia left, Otto von Bismarck's like, oh crap, we just lost an ally. I got to add another one. And the Triple Alliance would be formed in Russia's absence, right? The Triple Alliance would be Germany, Austria, and Italy, right? Now, Austria becomes their big dual alliance. That's their big buddy, right? So the Germans were constantly trying to keep relations between the Austrians and the Russians firm, right? They wanted to keep them together. They were like, Otto von Bismarck was like, cool, can y'all hash this out? Come on, Alexander. Come on, Franz. Talk it over. Be buddies. Because when France is over there eating a croissant and looking at us weird, we'd like for them to not, they didn't want Russia to leave their alliance. So Russia did eventually realign when Bismarck promised the involvement of Russians in the creation of Slavic-based governments in the Balkans, right? And in 1887, the reinsurance treaty came in, right? And Bismarck's like, yes, let's go, right? And Russia re-enters the League of Three Emperors. However, notice really quickly the year. 1887, Russia re-enters the alliance. And then in 1888, what stupid, dead-arm weirdo comes into power? Kaiser Wilhelm II. And in that moment, when he comes to power, he sides with the Austrians instead of the Russians, right? Kaiser Wilhelm says, we don't need the Russians anyway, Otto. Your ideas are outdated, you old man, and you've been puppeting my father for years. So he forces Bismarck to resign, and he never reaffirms the alliance with Russia. Wait a second. That means... Wait, do you hear that? What is that? What's going on? Who's out there? Ah! That's right! France smells blood in the water. And now that Russia is available to be courted, what do? France swoops in and forms this thing known as the Franco-Russian Alliance of 1891, right? And creates a permanent bond between the Russians and the French. Now, they do it in a lot of different ways. The French promise to give them loans and money and imperial grants and weapons and things like that to kind of continue to help them modernize, because Russia is about to go through their second wave of modernization, right? They're giving them money to do these things, to help build the Trans-Siberian Railway, to help them do these things. But the French are like a shark in the water. Look at this little French shark. Like, he's got a flag and a beret. All right, so now it's like the French Jaws. It would be like Jaws. Like, so now, anyway, or actually it'd be like Donna, 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 Donna. Oh. All right, so anyway, but the big thing about it is it was commemorated even. The most ornate and beautiful bridge in all of Paris. This is called the Pont d'Alexandre III. This is literally a bridge named after Alexander III, the Russian emperor that signed the alliance. And guess what this is back here? Guess what that is? That's the Hotel des Invalides. That is the palace where Napoleon's dead body is, and where all the poor people went to go get weapons to actually storm the Bastille with. Or not storm the Bastille with, but went and got the guns and then found out that the gunpowder was in the Bastille. That's that place, right? So, it's a very beautiful place. I can't wait to go there. Apparently it's gorgeous. It connects the Champs-Elysees to, the old Bastille area, right? So, but the big thing, though, is there's even more distrust now growing between Great Britain and Germany, right? Because if you're a German right now and you're Kaiser Wilhelm, you're like, maybe I can court the British, right? If I can get the British on my side, it'll be fine. Oh, and also, I should be able to do this. Great Queen Victoria, I know her real well. We'll talk about that whole deal in class tomorrow. But Kaiser Wilhelm looks over at the British and they're like, yeah, I like that idea. Let's maybe go with them, right? But then something happens. And Kaiser Wilhelm, instead of being chill, enters into this thing known as the Anglo-German arms race, right? So Kaiser Wilhelm, being an emasculated, petty little turd, enters into this idea of trying to build ships as fast as he can. Because a guy, an American, named Alfred T. Mahan, that you will talk about in U.S. history as well, and you can jot his name down if you want, because it'll come up when you get to Mr. Wooderson's class, was an admiral of the U.S. military and an admiral in the U.S. Navy, and he actually came along and said, hey, The great dominance of power is not measured by how much stuff you can take or ship. It's measured by how large your navy is. We live in a post-imperial world. We must ship goods around. You need a navy to protect those shipments, right? And so Kaiser Wilhelm adopts this, and he begins to try and influx his navy and try to build up to be as big as the British. Well, the British then decide, oh, you want to try and make as many boats as we have? We're going to make a new boat, right? And that new boat was known as the HMS Dreadnought, right? Dreadnought as in it strikes fear at a ferocious speed, right? Like so, the Dreadnought was the very first full iron hull steel warship created by the British, and they begin to make these things as fast as possible. Now, the Germans are going to try and make as many Dreadnought-class ships and things like that and build their navy up as well, but what ends up occurring is they can't make them fast enough. And the British link their national pride to the creation of these boats. There were actually these big chants that went on in the streets outside of Parliament to create more bills to fund more ships called "We Want 8 and We Won't Wait," where they would be like, we want 8 more dreadnoughts right now, because it made jobs and created working stability for British people. And so the British are going to end up winning this arms race, but this creates a lot of distrust. And so Kaiser Wilhelm backs down and says, you know what we're going to build instead? Unterseebooten, right? So Unterseebooten is a U-boat, their new toy, also known as a submarine, right? So like they're going to try and readopt the idea of raiding people and go against Mahan's ideas and be like, oh, well, if we ever need to use them, we'll just use submarines to sink these dreadnoughts because they can't see them anyway, and sonar hadn't been invented yet. But wait a minute, hold on. You're telling me right now, Mr. Terry? Yes. That Germany lost their alliance with Russia, and then who came and go? Wait, what's that? Oh no, that's right, he's back again, right? That French shark shows up and realizes that Great Britain is now free to be courted, right? And they enter into this thing known as the Entente Cordiale between Britain and France, right? So Britain and France create a bonding alliance. That means France is allied with Russia and Great Britain and is looking over at Germany like it's a matter of time, tools. That's right. You can kind of look at this whole thing and say that France has a very heavy hand at starting this whole war, right? And then the Russo-Japanese War happens in 1905. Good big thing to remember that's on the back of your mind. And then the Kaiser makes everything even worse, right? When he has this thing known as the First Moroccan Crisis, right? So he starts a big snafu whenever he actually creates an issue in Morocco when he goes there because the French are trying to exert their control over this imperial colony. Morocco is in North Africa, right? And he goes over there and tells the Sultan of Africa to resist any French foreign influence, right? And he tries to butt into this new alliance that is being created between John Bull, which is England, and then France, right here, Marianne, which is the image of post-industrial France, right? And so the French get so mad at this entire thing that he shows up on a white horse. And I'll tell you the story and stuff like that. So leave 2 spaces underneath the Moroccan crisis, and we'll talk more about it in class tomorrow. Do not let me forget, though. Be like, hey, Mr. Terry, Moroccan crisis. Go over it. And then we'll talk about it a little bit. But basically, the Kaiser comes in, and he just got his chest puffed out. And it leads to a big issue that goes into the war because it causes the French and the British to actually solidify their dislike of Great Britain, or of Germany. And then yet again, for the 3rd time. There he is, right? And then the French encourage the Russians to sign an Anglo-Russian alliance, effectively creating this thing known as the Triple Entente. And the Triple Entente would be Britain, France, and Russia, all because Kaiser Wilhelm doesn't know how to manage his alliances, right? But that's it right there. I'll talk to you guys soon. Y'all have a great evening.